Old hag, remember tonight. Talk back again and you'll sleep outside. Those were the last words my daughter-in-law screamed at me before I discovered the truth that would destroy her perfect life. What I uncovered in the following weeks left my entire family in ruins. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Stay until the very end to see how this unfolds, and please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my story travels. At 70 years old, I thought I'd learned to recognize cruelty in all its forms. I'd survived a difficult childhood in rural Pennsylvania, put myself through nursing school while working night shifts at a diner, raised 3 children largely on my own after my husband's construction accident left him disabled for years before his death. Life had taught me to spot manipulation, recognize gaslighting, and stand firm against those who would diminish me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the slow, calculated cruelty of living under my son's roof with his wife, Victoria. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and this is the story of how I went from respected matriarch to household servant, and ultimately, to the woman who brought down a carefully constructed empire of lies. Let me take you back to where it all began, 8 months before that terrible October night. It was a bright February morning in Riverside, Connecticut, when I took the fall that changed everything. I was walking down the front steps of my modest 2-story colonial on Maple Grove Avenue, the house where I'd raised my children, the house filled with 40 years of memories. There was black ice hidden under a dusting of snow, invisible and treacherous. My right hip took the full impact when I hit the concrete walkway. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, like someone had driven a railroad spike through my pelvis. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, heard me cry out and called 911. The diagnosis was a fractured hip requiring surgery and extensive rehabilitation. At 70, the doctors explained with carefully neutral expressions, recovery would be slow. I'd need help with basic tasks for at least 3 to 4 months, possibly longer. Stairs would be particularly challenging. My daughter, Sophie, lived in Portland, Oregon with her family, too far to provide daily assistance. My youngest, Brian, was deployed overseas with the army. That left Marcus, my middle child, my tender-hearted boy who'd always been the peacemaker of the family. Marcus arrived at the hospital within hours of my surgery, his face creased with worry. At 42, he still had that same cowlick in his dark hair that I used to smooth down when he was a boy heading off to school. He'd done well for himself, a senior project manager at a tech consulting firm in Riverside, married to Victoria for 6 years, living in a beautiful contemporary home in the Lakewood Heights neighborhood. "Mom, you can't go back to your house," he said, holding my hand in the recovery room. "Not with those stairs. You'll stay with us until you're fully healed. We have the guest suite on the first floor, separate bathroom, everything you need." "Marcus, I couldn't impose like that," I protested, though the thought of navigating my own staircase filled me with dread. "It's not an imposition. It's what family does." His eyes were so earnest, so full of the goodness I'd tried to instill in all my children. "Victoria and I already discussed it. She's eager to have you." That last sentence should have been my first warning. Not, "she agrees," or, "she's fine with it," but, "she's eager." The word choice felt performative, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. But I was in pain, frightened of being alone during recovery, and desperate to believe that my son's marriage was as solid as it appeared from the outside. So I agreed. The first week at Marcus and Victoria's home was actually pleasant, which made everything that came after so much more devastating. Their house was stunning, all clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and that particular kind of expensive minimalism that requires constant maintenance to preserve. Everything was white or cream or soft gray, with carefully curated accent pieces that screamed interior designer. Victoria seemed attentive those first days. She was 38, nearly a decade younger than Marcus, with the kind of polished beauty that came from regular salon visits, personal trainers, and a skincare routine that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Honey blonde hair always perfectly styled, designer athleisure where even when she wasn't exercising, makeup that looked natural but I knew took considerable time and skill to apply. "Eleanor, can I get you anything?" she'd ask, popping her head into my guest suite. "More water? Different pillows? I want you to be comfortable." She'd bring me magazines, adjust the thermostat, even offered to order food from my favorite restaurant in my old neighborhood. Marcus beamed at these gestures, clearly proud of his wife's hospitality. But I noticed small things. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. How her offers of help always came when Marcus was within earshot. The subtle tension in her shoulders when she had to actually follow through on those offers. By the second week, the mask began to slip. It started with comments disguised as concern. "Eleanor, you're moving so slowly today. Are you sure you're doing your physical therapy exercises? You need to push yourself more if you want to recover." Or, "The physical therapist mentioned you should be able to shower independently by now. I think you might be becoming too dependent on help. It's not healthy." The observations were always delivered with a smile, always prefaced with, "I'm just worried about your progress," but they carried an undercurrent of criticism that made my stomach clench. Marcus worked long hours at his firm, often leaving before 7 a.m. and not returning until after 7 p.m. This meant most of my interactions were with Victoria, who ran her boutique marketing agency from the home office upstairs. She specialized in lifestyle brand management for what she called aspirational companies. Basically, she helped wealthy people and expensive businesses craft their public images on social media and in the press. As my mobility improved and I required less direct assistance, Victoria's attitude shifted more dramatically. The concerned caretaker persona evaporated, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Since you're able to move around now, maybe you could help with some light housework," she suggested one morning in late March. We were in the kitchen, all white marble countertops and custom cabinetry, and she was making one of her elaborate smoothie bowls, the kind that looked beautiful on Instagram but took 45 minutes to prepare and photograph. "Of course," I said, eager to feel useful rather than burdensome. "What would be helpful?" "Just loading the dishwasher after meals, maybe wiping down the counters. Simple things." She arranged dragon fruit and edible flowers on her smoothie bowl with tweezers. "Maria, our housekeeper, only comes twice a week now. Budget cuts." Budget cuts seemed unlikely in a household where Victoria regularly received packages from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, but I didn't question it. I was grateful to contribute. The simple things quickly expanded. By April, I was doing all the dishes, not just loading the dishwasher. Then it became dishes plus sweeping the kitchen floor. Then dishes, sweeping, and wiping down all the counters and appliances. Then vacuuming the main living areas. Then dusting. Then organizing Victoria's pantry according to an elaborate system she'd seen on a home organization influencer's account. Each new task was introduced casually, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, while you're already cleaning the kitchen, would you mind just quickly vacuuming the living room? The throw pillows on the sofa need fluffing too, they photograph better when they're properly arranged." Everything in Victoria's world was about how things photographed. Her home wasn't a place to live, it was a carefully curated set for her social media presence. She had over 200,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted about elevated living, mindful luxury, and curated wellness. The irony of having her disabled elderly mother-in-law doing her housework while she photographed artisanal cheese boards wasn't lost on me. Marcus noticed my increased activity but misinterpreted it entirely. "Mom, it's so great to see you moving around more. Your recovery is going better than expected. Victoria mentioned you've been helping around the house. That's exactly the kind of activity the physical therapist recommended, right?" I wanted to tell him that yes, light activity was recommended, but not 4 hours a day of cleaning someone else's showcase home. But he looked so relieved, so happy that his mother and wife were getting along, that I couldn't bring myself to burden him with the truth. Besides, I told myself, it wasn't that bad. I was being useful. I was earning my keep. This was temporary, just until my hip fully healed and I could return to my own home. But Victoria had other plans. In May, 5 months into my stay, she began making comments about my house on Maple Grove Avenue. "You know, Eleanor, that neighborhood isn't what it used to be. All those older homes require so much maintenance. At your age, do you really want to deal with a 2-story house, yard work, snow shoveling?" I've managed fine for 40 years, I replied, folding the laundry she'd asked me to handle. This was another task that had mysteriously become my responsibility, despite the fact that I'd never seen Victoria or Marcus do their own laundry even once. But you're 70 now. Things are different. She was scrolling through her phone, barely looking at me. Marcus and I were thinking, what if you sold the house? There are some lovely senior living communities in the area. You'd have your own apartment, activities, meals provided, people your own age. Wouldn't that be nice? My blood ran cold. I'm not ready for a senior living facility. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. Of course, she said quickly, though her tone suggested she thought otherwise. Just something to consider. Your house must be worth quite a bit. That neighborhood, even if it's declining, still has good property values. You could use that money to secure really quality care for your later years. Later years. As if 70 meant I was already circling the drain. I mentioned the conversation to Marcus that night when he came home. We were in the kitchen, I was preparing dinner, another task that had somehow become mine, and he was loosening his tie, looking exhausted. Victoria mentioned selling my house, I said carefully, stirring pasta sauce. I want you to know I'm not interested. That house is my home. It has your father's workshop in the garage, the garden we planted together, the growth charts on the pantry wall marking where you kids grew up. Mom, no one's pressuring you to sell, Marcus interrupted, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Victoria just worries about you managing that big house alone as you get older. She means well. I'm managing fine. You had a major fall that required surgery. Which happened outside, on ice. It could have happened anywhere. Marcus sighed and rubbed his temples. Can we not do this right now? I've had a brutal day at work. Bridgeport Analytics is threatening to pull their contract and I've been in damage control meetings since 8 a.m. I swallowed my frustration and changed the subject, asking about the details of his work crisis. This was becoming a pattern. Any time I tried to express discomfort with my situation or Victoria's treatment of me, Marcus was either too stressed, too tired, or too busy to engage. Looking back, I realize he was already under Victoria's control. The signs were there if I'd been willing to see them. The way he deferred to her on every household decision. How he always took her side in any disagreement, no matter how minor. The fact that he worked increasingly long hours, as if avoiding his own home. But I loved my son. I wanted to believe the best of him, of his marriage, of my situation. So I pushed down my concerns and continued playing the role Victoria had assigned me, the useful grandmother servant who should be grateful for a place to stay. Summer brought new humiliations. Victoria began asking me to run errands, picking up her dry cleaning, returning items to stores, waiting for furniture deliveries so she wouldn't have to interrupt her work. These tasks required me to use my own car and gas money, neither of which was ever reimbursed. Eleanor, could you be a dear and drive to Bloomfield to pick up that lamp I ordered from the boutique there? They don't deliver and I have a client meeting on Zoom at 2 p.m. Bloomfield was 45 minutes away. My hips still ached after long drives. But I went, because what else could I do? I was living in her house, eating her food, occupying her guest suite. Except it wasn't really her house, was it? It was Marcus's house too. My son's house. But somehow Victoria had convinced everyone, including Marcus and me, that she was the one doing us all a favor by allowing us to exist in her perfectly curated space. The friends and family who visited saw only the surface, a beautiful home, a successful daughter-in-law, a son who'd done well for himself. Victoria was always gracious in company, complimenting me, asking about my health, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. Eleanor has been such a help during her recovery, she'd tell visitors, her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive. We're so glad she's here with us. The subtext was clear to me, though. I was supposed to be grateful. Compliant. Useful. By September, I'd stopped thinking about when I might move back to my own house. Victoria had successfully convinced Marcus that my place was too much for me to handle, and Marcus had convinced me that they'd worry too much if I lived alone. My own house sat empty, slowly accumulating the dust and neglect that Victoria had warned would be too much for me to manage. The physical demands on me increased. Victoria decided to host a series of dinner parties for her business contacts, potential clients who could elevate her brand and bring in the high-paying contracts she craved. These weren't casual gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated events designed to showcase Victoria's taste, her lifestyle, her access to the kind of elevated living her followers aspired to achieve. And I was to be the invisible labor making it all possible. I need you to prep all the vegetables, Eleanor. Julie, and the carrots, they need to be uniform for presentation. And the table settings need to be perfect. Use the Wedgwood china, not the everyday dishes. Polish the silver. Make sure there are no water spots on the crystal. These dinner parties happen twice a month, sometimes more. Each one required hours of preparation, cooking, serving, and cleaning. Victoria would breeze through in her designer dresses, playing hostess and taking credit for every detail, while I was relegated to the kitchen or dismissed to my room once the serving was complete. Marcus attended these dinners but barely participated. He'd sit at the table, smile politely, make small talk about his work when directly addressed, but mostly he seemed to fade into the background. I wondered if he even noticed how much work I did to make these evenings possible, or if he'd accepted Victoria's narrative that I was simply helping out in exchange for room and board. My daughter Sophie called regularly, but I found myself minimizing the truth when she asked how things were going. Fine, honey. My hip is much better. Marcus and Victoria have been very welcoming. I couldn't bear to tell her that her brother had become a stranger, that his wife treated me like hired help, that I'd somehow lost myself in this beautiful prison of a house. Sophie had her own life, her own struggles with 2 teenagers and a demanding job as a hospital administrator. I didn't want to burden her. I didn't want to be the complaining elderly mother who couldn't get along with her daughter-in-law. So I stayed quiet. I did my chores. I ran my errands. I made myself small and unobtrusive and useful, hoping that would be enough to maintain peace in my son's home. And then came that terrible October night that changed everything. Victoria's sister, Natasha, was visiting from Boston, a rare occurrence that had Victoria in a frenzy of preparation. Natasha was 4 years younger than Victoria, equally polished but with an edge of cruelty that Victoria at least tried to disguise. She was a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm, unmarried, and made her wealth and success known in every conversation. This dinner needs to be perfect, Victoria told me that Tuesday morning. Natasha knows everyone who matters in Boston's business scene. If I can impress her, she might refer some of her contacts to my agency. The pressure was intense. Victoria had hired a florist to create elaborate centerpieces. She'd ordered special wines from a boutique shop in Hartford. She'd planned a 5-course menu that would require me to spend the entire day cooking and preparing. And Eleanor, Victoria added, her voice taking on that edge I'd learned to dread, I need you to serve tonight. These are important people. I can't be running back and forth to the kitchen. You'll bring out each course, refill wine glasses, clear plates. Can you handle that? Can you handle that? As if I were some fragile, incompetent person rather than a woman who'd worked 12-hour nursing shifts well into my 60s. Yes, I can handle it, I said quietly. Good. And please, try to move with some grace. No shuffling or wincing. I know your hip bothers you, but we need to maintain a certain atmosphere. The dismissal of my pain was casual, almost offhand, but it stung deeply. This was the woman my son had married. This was the person he'd chosen to build a life with. I spent the entire day preparing for that dinner party. By 6 p.m., when I needed to start getting the dining room ready, my hip was screaming in protest. But I pushed through, arranging the place settings according to Victoria's detailed diagram, ensuring every fork and knife was positioned with geometric precision. The guests arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, Natasha and 5 of Victoria's business contacts, all dressed in expensive cocktails attire that made me acutely aware of my simple slacks and blouse. I tried to dress nicely, but next to their designer labels and perfect styling, I felt like exactly what Victoria saw me as, an old woman who didn't belong in this world of curated elegance. Victoria glided through her role as hostess with practiced ease, directing the conversation, laughing at the right moments, steering discussions toward topics that showed off her knowledge of luxury brands and lifestyle trends. Marcus sat at the head of the table, a prop in his wife's performance, occasionally contributing but mostly watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. I brought out the first course, butternut squash soup with sage and crispy prosciutto, and began serving. The guests barely acknowledged me, so absorbed were they in Victoria's stories about her recent trip to Napa Valley and the exclusive wine tasting she'd arranged. The second course was seared scallops with cauliflower puree and caviar. The third was duck breast with cherry gastrique. Each dish required perfect timing, perfect presentation, perfect execution. I was moving constantly between the kitchen and dining room, my hip protesting every step but my pride refusing to let me show the pain. It was during the fourth course, beef tenderloin with truffle butter, that everything fell apart. I was clearing the salad plates, moving carefully around the table, when my hip gave one of those sudden, sharp spasms that took my breath away. My hand trembled, just for a second, and one of the plates tilted. A small amount of leftover vinaigrette slid across the china and splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth near Natasha's elbow. The conversation stopped. Everyone's eyes turned to me. Victoria's face drained of color, then flushed bright red. Her carefully maintained composure cracked like fine porcelain hitting concrete. Eleanor. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. How could you be so clumsy? I'm so sorry, I said quickly, reaching for a napkin to blot the stain. My hip just. Your hip, always your hip. Natasha interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. She looked at her sister with exaggerated sympathy. Vicky, I don't understand why you put up with this. Maybe if she weren't so old and feeble, she could actually handle simple tasks without making a mess. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I froze, the plate still in my hands, staring at this woman who just called me old and feeble in front of a room full of strangers. Victoria should have defended me. She should have told her sister that was inappropriate, cruel, unacceptable. Instead, she forced a tight smile and addressed her guests. I apologize, everyone. This is exactly why we usually have professional catering for our dinners, but I thought we'd try a more intimate approach tonight. She looked at me with an expression that made me feel about 2 inches tall. Eleanor, please clean that up immediately. The implication was devastatingly clear. I was the amateur mistake ruining her professional event. I looked at Marcus, silently begging him to say something, to stand up for his mother. He was staring at his plate, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Did nothing. He just sat there like a statue while his wife and sister-in-law humiliated his mother in front of strangers. I cleaned up the small spill with shaking hands, then retreated to the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could hear Victoria's voice rising back to its performative cheerfulness as she smoothly redirected the conversation to a story about a celebrity client. The incident with the clumsy old mother-in-law became just a minor hiccup in her perfectly orchestrated evening. I stood at the kitchen sink, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not while I still had work to do. The rest of the evening passed in a fog. I brought out the final course, a chocolate torte with raspberry coulis that had taken me 3 hours to prepare, and watched the guests exclaim over its beauty while Victoria accepted their compliments as if she'd made it herself. I cleared plates, refilled coffee cups, and faded into the background like the piece of furniture Victoria had reduced me to. The guests finally left around 11 p.m., full of praise for Victoria's hosting skills and promising to refer business contacts her way. I heard Natasha telling Victoria how brave she was for managing such elegant events despite having challenging family circumstances. I was the challenging family circumstances they were discussing. I was loading the dishwasher, moving slowly because every muscle in my body ached and my hip felt like ground glass, when Victoria and Natasha entered the kitchen. They were both carrying wine glasses, still half full, and from the flushed look on their faces, this wasn't their first bottle of the evening. Finally, Victoria sighed dramatically, kicking off her 4-inch heels and leaving them in the middle of the floor. That was exhausting. Did you see how much Clarissa Pemberton ate? 3 helpings of dessert. No wonder she can't lose weight. The dinner was beautiful though, Natasha said, hopping up to sit on the marble counter, something Victoria would have screamed at me for doing. You really do know how to create an atmosphere. Though I have to say, Vicky, I'm amazed you managed to pull these off with her around. Her. Not Eleanor. Not your mother-in-law. Just her, like I was a stray animal they were discussing. I kept washing dishes, my back to them, but my body was rigid with tension. I know, Victoria said, and I could hear her pouring more wine. It's not ideal. But Marcus is so sensitive about his mother. He actually thinks she's being helpful. They both laughed, sharp, cutting sounds that felt like knives against my skin. Why doesn't he just put her in a home? Natasha asked, her words slightly slurred. There are perfectly nice assisted living places. She'd probably be happier with people her own age. You know, playing bingo and watching Wheel of Fortune or whatever old people do. My hands stilled in the dishwater. The casual cruelty of the comment took my breath away. Marcus is too sentimental, Victoria replied. He has this ridiculous notion that family should take care of each other. Meanwhile, I'm stuck with a live-in maid who can't even serve a salad course without making a mess. Do you know she's been here for 8 months now? 8 months of tiptoeing around her feelings, pretending she's contributing when really she's just existing. Taking up space in my perfectly designed home. Your home does photograph beautifully, Natasha mused. Though having an elderly woman shuffling around must make it hard to get good content for your Instagram. Oh God, tell me about it. I have to schedule all my photo sessions for when she's doing errands or hiding in her room. Can you imagine if my followers saw a 70-year-old woman with a cane in the background of my elevated living posts? They both dissolved into laughter again. Something inside me snapped. All the months of biting my tongue, of making myself small, of accepting treatment that no human being should accept, it all came rushing up like a wave I couldn't hold back. I turned from the sink, water dripping from my hands onto the spotless floor Victoria was so proud of. I'm standing right here, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Victoria's eyes widened in surprise, as if she'd genuinely forgotten I was a person who could hear and process and feel. But the shock lasted only a moment before her expression hardened into something cold and ugly. Then maybe you should go to your room if you don't like what you're hearing, she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. This is my son's house, I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I'm not a servant. I'm not existing or taking up space. I'm family. You're a burden, Victoria shot back, sliding off the counter and taking a step toward me. An obligation Marcus feels guilty about but doesn't actually want. Do you really think he enjoys having his elderly mother living here? He's just too nice to tell you the truth. That's enough, I said, my heart pounding. You don't speak for my son. Don't I? Victoria's smile was cruel. Who do you think he listens to, Eleanor? His wife, who he shares a bed with every night, who supports his career, who's built this beautiful life with him? Or his mother, who reminds him of obligations and guilt and everything he's trying to move beyond? Natasha was watching this exchange with fascinated glee, like it was a reality TV show playing out for her entertainment. I won't be spoken to this way, I said, straightening my spine despite the pain shooting through my hip. Not in my son's home. Not anywhere. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion, like a nightmare sequence you can't wake up from. Victoria's face flushed scarlet with rage. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume cloying and overwhelming. When she spoke, her voice was low and vicious, each word designed to wound. Old hag, remember tonight. Talk back to me again and you'll sleep outside. Do you understand me? This is my house. My rules. Marcus does what I tell him to do. And you are here because I allow it. Not because you're wanted. Not because you're needed. Because I'm generous enough to give you a place to stay instead of letting Marcus dump you in the cheapest nursing home we can find. The words felt like physical blows. I actually swayed on my feet, gripping the counter for support. Natasha gasped, whether from shock at her sister's cruelty or delight at the drama, I couldn't tell and didn't care. "Where's Marcus?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice breaking. "Upstairs, probably asleep," Victoria said, her tone mocking. "He takes medication to help him sleep through my late nights. Very helpful for when I need to work or entertain without worrying about disturbing him. And even if he were here, Eleanor, what exactly do you think he would do? Stand up to me? Choose his mother over his wife?" She laughed, cold and sharp. "You really are delusional if you think that would ever happen." She turned to Natasha, dismissing me entirely. "Come on, Tasha. Let's take this wine to the patio. The air in here has gotten stale." They left, their laughter echoing through the hallways of this house that had never been and would never be my home. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, my reflection staring back at me from the darkened window over the sink. An old woman. Tired. Hurt. Humiliated beyond anything I'd ever experienced. But as I finally made my way to my small guest room, my suitcase still unpacked in the closet from 8 months ago, something began to crystallize inside me. The tears I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt something harder, colder, sharper settling into my chest. Anger. Pure, righteous anger. I had allowed this to happen. I'd made myself small and accommodating and grateful, accepting crumbs of tolerance in place of respect. I'd told myself I was being helpful, earning my keep, doing what was necessary to maintain family harmony. But there was no harmony here. There was only a cruel woman who'd somehow convinced my son to abandon his own mother, and a son who'd become so twisted in his wife's manipulation that he couldn't see what was happening in his own home. As I sat on the edge of my bed that night, sleep impossible, I made several decisions. First, I would not be driven out. I would not shuffle off to some assisted living facility to fade away quietly while Victoria erased me from her perfectly curated life. Second, I would not continue as her unpaid servant, accepting abuse in exchange for a roof over my head. Third, and most importantly, I would find out what hold Victoria had over Marcus. Because the man who sat silently at that dinner table while his wife and sister-in-law humiliated his mother, that wasn't the son I'd raised. Something had happened to him, something beyond just falling in love with the wrong person. Victoria had secrets. I could feel it in the way she controlled every aspect of their lives, in the way Marcus had become a ghost in his own home, in the way she was so confident that he would never stand up to her. And I was going to discover what those secrets were. The next morning, I would start looking for answers. I would pay attention in ways I hadn't before. I would stop being the grateful, compliant victim and start being the intelligent, observant woman I'd always been. Victoria had called me an old hag and threatened to put me out on the street. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I was Eleanor Whitfield, a woman who'd survived poverty, put herself through nursing school, raised 3 children largely alone, and spent 40 years dealing with life and death situations in hospital wards. I'd handled abusive doctors, entitled patients, impossible working conditions, and the slow death of my husband from complications of his injury. I wasn't some helpless elderly woman to be dismissed and discarded. And before this was over, Victoria would learn that the biggest mistake of her carefully curated life was underestimating the old hag she'd just threatened. Tomorrow would begin my investigation. And what I discovered would prove that Victoria's perfect life was built on something far more sinister than just a cruel personality and an inflated ego. I just didn't know it yet. But I would soon. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Victoria's voice. "Old hag, remember tonight. Talk back again and you'll sleep outside." The cruelty of it burned through me like acid. But beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, something else was growing. A cold, calculating determination that felt both foreign and familiar. I'd spent 8 months being passive, accommodating, grateful. That version of Eleanor Whitfield died in that kitchen last night. The woman who lay awake in that guest room, staring at the ceiling as dawn crept through the curtains, was someone different. Someone who'd finally remembered that she'd spent 40 years as a nurse, a profession that required observation, pattern recognition, and the ability to see what others missed. I'd been so focused on not being a burden that I'd stopped paying attention. That ended now. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains around 6:30 a.m. I heard Marcus moving around upstairs, the familiar sounds of his morning routine. Shower running. Footsteps across the bedroom floor. The electronic beep of the coffee maker starting on its timer. I got up slowly, my hips stiff from yesterday's excessive activity, and made my way to the bathroom. The face that stared back at me from the mirror looked older than I remembered. When had those lines around my mouth become so deep? When had my eyes taken on that defeated look? No more, I thought. No more shrinking. No more apologizing for existing. I dressed carefully in slacks and a blouse, not the comfortable loungewear I'd been wearing around the house, but actual clothes that made me feel more like myself. I even put on a light touch of makeup, something I'd stopped doing months ago. When I emerged from my room, Marcus was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into his travel mug. He was already dressed for work in one of his expensive suits, his dark hair still damp from the shower. He looked tired, no, exhausted. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from more than just a late night. "Morning, Mom," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "How did you sleep?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. How did I sleep after being called an old hag and threatened with homelessness by his wife? How did I sleep after watching him sit silent while I was humiliated in front of strangers? But I swallowed the bitter words and said simply, "Not well." "Marcus, we need to talk about last night." His shoulders tensed. "Mom, I really need to get to work. I have an early meeting." "Marcus." I used my mother voice, the one that had always cut through his excuses when he was a child. "This can't wait. Your wife threatened to put me out on the street. You were there. You heard what happened with the dinner party, or at least you should have." He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes shocked me. Fear. My son was afraid. "She didn't mean it like that," he said quickly, too quickly. "Victoria just gets stressed with these business dinners. They're important for her career. She was probably just overwhelmed and she called me an old hag, Marcus. She said I was a burden you didn't want. She told me this was her house and I was only here because she allowed it." I stepped closer to him. "And you said nothing. You did nothing. Why?" He turned away, busying himself with adding cream to his coffee even though he usually drank it black. His hands were shaking slightly. "It's complicated, Mom. Then uncomplicate it for me. Because right now, I'm trying to understand how the son I raised, the boy who once got suspended for fighting a kid who was bullying his little brother, can sit silent while his wife abuses his mother." "She doesn't abuse you," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. She has high standards. She's particular about her home and her image. It's part of her business. Her business doesn't require her to treat me like a servant. Her image doesn't require her to humiliate me in front of strangers." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Marcus, look at me. Please." He turned, and for just a moment, I saw my son again. The real Marcus, buried under whatever Victoria had done to him. His eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry about last night. You're right. I should have said something. I should have defended you. But he stopped, struggling with something. "But what?" He shook his head. "I have to go to work, Mom. We'll talk tonight, I promise. When Victoria's out at her yoga class. We'll talk then." He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the garage door, then paused. Without turning around, he said quietly, "Don't tell Victoria I said anything. Please. It'll only make things worse." Then he was gone, and I was alone in the kitchen with those cryptic words echoing in my mind. "Don't tell Victoria. It'll make things worse." What could be worse than the situation I was already in? I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen island, the same island where Victoria had spent countless hours staging food photos for Instagram while I did the actual cooking. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Victoria's shower running upstairs. I had maybe 30 minutes before she came down. 30 minutes to start paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I started with what was in front of me. The kitchen was spotless, as always. I'd made sure of that last night despite my exhaustion. But now I looked at it differently. Not as a space I needed to keep clean, but as a source of information. The mail sat in a decorative basket on the counter, Victoria's organizational system for incoming correspondence. I'd been trained not to touch it, to let her sort through everything first. But this morning, I rifled through it. Bills, mostly. Credit card statements addressed to Victoria Ashford Morrison. That hyphenated name she'd insisted on keeping, for professional branding purposes. Several envelopes from places I recognized: Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus. One thick envelope from something called Radiance Med Spa and Wellness Center. Another from Pemberton Financial Advisory Services. I took photos of all the return addresses with my phone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I'd learned in nursing that sometimes you collected data first and understood the pattern later. There was also a stack of magazines, glossy publications about luxury living, home design, and lifestyle branding. I flipped through one and found several articles dog-eared. They all had a similar theme: building your personal brand, monetizing your influence, from lifestyle blogger to seven-figure business. Victoria's aspirations were clear. She didn't just want to be successful, she wanted to be wealthy, influential, admired. The kind of person who got invited to exclusive events and featured in magazine profiles. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I quickly put everything back the way I'd found it and refilled my coffee cup, positioning myself by the window as if I'd just been enjoying the morning view. Victoria appeared 10 minutes later, already fully made up and dressed in expensive athleisure wear, black leggings that probably cost $200 and a designer hoodie. Her hair was blown out perfectly, her jewelry carefully chosen to look casual but expensive. She stopped when she saw me, surprise flickering across her face before she arranged it into cool neutrality. "Eleanor. You're up early." "I've always been an early riser," I said pleasantly. "Would you like coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot." She studied me suspiciously, clearly trying to figure out if I was being genuine or sarcastic. "I'll get my own, thanks." We stood in awkward silence as she prepared her elaborate morning smoothie, the kind that required 6 different supplements, protein powder, collagen peptides, and an array of frozen fruits. Everything had to be organic, sourced from specific brands, measured precisely. "About last night," I began carefully. "What about it?" She didn't look at me, focused on adding exact measurements to her blender. "I think we should clear the air." "Things were said that." "Things were said because you overstepped," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp. "You embarrassed me in front of important business contacts. Then you eavesdropped on a private conversation and made it confrontational." I bit back my initial response and tried a different approach. "You're right. I should have been more careful with the plates. My hip has been bothering me more than usual." This seemed to catch her off guard. She'd expected me to argue, to defend myself. Instead, I was being conciliatory. "Well," she said, slightly less hostile. "Yes. You do need to be more careful. These dinners are crucial for my business. I can't afford mistakes." "I understand. Your career is very important." I paused. "You've built something impressive with your agency. Marcus is very proud of you." This was true, even if my tone might have carried undertones she couldn't quite read. Marcus was proud of her, or at least he used to be. Now I wasn't sure what he felt besides fear. Victoria's posture relaxed slightly. Praise and admiration were the currencies she valued most. "Thank you. It's been a lot of work. People don't realize how much effort goes into building a personal brand and a business simultaneously. I'm sure. How many clients do you have now? 12 active clients, with 3 more in the pipeline. She poured her smoothie into a glass tumbler. If I can land the Pemberton account, that would be a game changer. Clarissa Pemberton has connections throughout Connecticut's luxury market. Pemberton, I repeated, as if trying to place the name. Is that the woman who was here last night? The one who enjoyed the chocolate torte so much? Victoria smiled, pleased that I'd noticed. Yes. She's very interested in hiring me to manage her new wellness retreat concept. It could be worth 6 figures annually if I handle it right. That's wonderful. So these dinner parties are really investment in your business. Exactly. She took a sip of her smoothie, warming to the topic. It's about creating an experience, showing potential clients that I understand luxury, that I can execute flawlessly. That's why details matter so much. Why everything has to be perfect. Including me, I said softly. She met my eyes then, and for a moment I thought I saw something like guilt flicker across her face. But it was gone instantly. Including everything, she corrected. This house, the food, the service, the atmosphere, it all contributes to the image I'm selling. Can you understand that? I think so. You need to present a certain lifestyle to attract the kind of clients who can afford your services. Yes. She seemed relieved that I was finally grasping her perspective. It's nothing personal, Eleanor. It's just business. Calling me an old hag and threatening to put me on the street was just business. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Well, I said, maintaining my pleasant tone, I certainly don't want to interfere with your success. Maybe we should discuss how I can help in ways that support your business rather than hinder it. Victoria looked at me with surprise and something that might have been respect. That's actually very mature of you. I appreciate it. Family should support each other, I said, echoing Marcus's words from months ago. She nodded, then glanced at her smart watch. I have a client call in 10 minutes. We can talk more about this later. But Eleanor? I'm glad you understand now. Things will be much easier if we're on the same page. She took her smoothie and headed upstairs to her office, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The same page. As if we'd just had some productive conversation rather than her accepting my apparent surrender. But I hadn't surrendered. I'd done something I'd learned in nursing when dealing with difficult doctors or hostile patients. I'd made them think they'd won. I'd fed Victoria's ego, confirmed her worldview, and made her believe I'd accepted my place in her carefully constructed hierarchy. And now she'd be less guarded around me. I spent the rest of the morning doing what looked like my usual routine, cleaning, organizing, running errands. But I was paying attention to everything with new eyes. In Victoria's home office, which I accessed under the guise of vacuuming, I noticed her filing cabinet was locked. That was new. When had she started locking it? I also saw that her computer screen showed several open browser tabs before she minimized them when I entered. One of them had been a banking website. In the master bedroom, which I entered to change their sheets, I found Marcus's nightstand drawer slightly ajar. Inside were several pill bottles, Ambien for sleep, Xanax for anxiety, and something called Lexapro that I recognized as an antidepressant. All prescribed within the last 6 months. My son was medicated for anxiety and depression, and I hadn't known. How had I not known? In the bathroom, Victoria's medicine cabinet revealed its own secrets. Anti-anxiety medication prescribed to her as well. Expensive skincare products, yes, but also Adderall and something called phentermine, a prescription weight loss drug. The bottles indicated she was taking far more than the recommended dosages. I took photos of everything with my phone, careful to put things back exactly as I'd found them. The home office proved most interesting. While Victoria was on her phone call in another room, I quickly rifled through the unlocked drawers of her desk. I found contracts, client agreements, invoicing records. Everything looked legitimate at first glance. But then I found something odd, a folder labeled Personal Investment Portfolio that contained statements from multiple investment accounts. The amounts were staggering, over $300,000 in various stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Victoria's business was successful, but not that successful. Her agency was maybe 3 years old. Even with a dozen clients, she couldn't have accumulated that much in investment capital. Unless the money came from somewhere else. I took photos of several pages, being careful to note the account numbers and dates. Then I found something even more interesting: bank statements for an account that wasn't in Victoria's name or Marcus's name. It was under VA Holdings, LLC, a business entity I'd never heard Marcus mention. The account showed regular deposits, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, $12,000 the month before. Large sums coming in with vague descriptions like consulting fee and project payment. But the withdrawals were what caught my attention. Large cash withdrawals, sometimes $10,000 at a time. What was Victoria doing with that much cash? I heard her footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the drawer, grabbing the vacuum cleaner and turning it on just as she appeared in the doorway. "Eleanor, I'm heading out for a meeting. I'll be back around 3 p.m. Can you make sure to pick up my dry cleaning? The ticket is on the counter." "Of course," I said pleasantly. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to determine if I was being sincere or mocking her. But apparently satisfied, she grabbed her designer handbag and left. The moment I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I went back to the office. This time, I took my time. I photographed every document I could find, working systematically through the desk drawers. Client contracts. Financial statements. Email printouts. I didn't know what would be important, so I documented everything. Then I tried the locked filing cabinet. It was a simple lock, the kind that came standard with office furniture. I'd learned to pick basic locks years ago when I worked in the hospital. Sometimes patients locked medications in drawers and we needed access in emergencies. It took me 5 minutes and a paperclip, but I got it open. Inside was a treasure trove of documents that Victoria clearly didn't want anyone to see. The first folder I pulled out was labeled Pemberton, Confidential. Inside were what looked like financial records, but they weren't for Clarissa Pemberton's business. They were personal bank statements, credit card records, tax returns, deeply private financial information. Why would Victoria have Clarissa Pemberton's personal financial records? The next folder was labeled Ashford Trust, Victoria's maiden name. Inside were documents related to a trust fund. According to the papers, Victoria had inherited approximately $800,000 from her grandmother 5 years ago, placed in a trust that was supposed to be managed by a financial advisory firm. But according to the most recent statements, the trust was nearly depleted. Less than $50,000 remained. Where had the rest of the money gone? I kept digging. Another folder contained property records for a condominium in Boston, not the one Natasha lived in, but a different address. The condo was owned by VA Holdings, LLC, that same mysterious business entity. And according to the mortgage records, it had been purchased 2 years ago for $450,000, with a down payment of $200,000. Why would Victoria own a secret property in Boston? The next discovery made my blood run cold. It was a folder labeled simply M. Marcus Morrison. Inside were documents I never should have seen. A life insurance policy on Marcus, taken out 2 years ago, for $2 million with Victoria as the sole beneficiary. That wasn't unusual for married couples. But underneath was another policy, this one for $5 million, taken out just 6 months ago. $7 million total in life insurance on my son. And there was more. A will, signed by Marcus, leaving everything to Victoria. Power of attorney documents giving Victoria control over all of Marcus's financial decisions if he became incapacitated. Healthcare directives naming Victoria as the sole decision-maker for his medical care. All of these documents had been signed within the last year, and all of them gave Victoria complete control over Marcus's life, finances, and death benefits. My hands were shaking as I photographed every page. This wasn't just suspicious, this was terrifying. I found one more folder before I heard a car in the driveway. It was labeled Research and contained printed articles about various topics: signs of early onset dementia, depression and cognitive decline in middle age, legal competency evaluations, involuntary commitment procedures. Why was Victoria researching dementia and involuntary commitment? I shoved everything back into the filing cabinet, locked it, and was halfway down the stairs with the vacuum cleaner when I realized the car I'd heard wasn't Victoria returning. It was just a delivery truck passing by. My heart was racing, and not from the quick movement. I felt like I'd just uncovered something dark and dangerous, but I didn't yet understand what all the pieces meant. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, trying to think through what I'd found. Victoria had personal financial records for at least one of her clients, obtained somehow without their knowledge. She'd burned through most of an $800,000 inheritance in just a few years. She owned a secret property in Boston through a shell company. She had massive life insurance policies on Marcus. She had complete legal control over his finances and medical decisions. She was researching dementia, cognitive decline, and involuntary commitment. And Marcus was medicated on heavy doses of anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants, and sleeping pills. I thought about his fear this morning. His exhaustion. The way he'd become a ghost in his own home. His cryptic warning, "Don't tell Victoria. It'll make things worse." A horrifying picture was beginning to form in my mind. What if Victoria wasn't just a cruel, controlling wife? What if she was actively harming Marcus? What if all those medications weren't prescribed for legitimate health issues, but were being used to keep him sedated, compliant, confused? What if she was planning something even worse? The thought was so terrible I almost dismissed it as paranoid imagination. But I'd spent 40 years as a nurse. I'd seen cases of medical abuse, of family members slowly poisoning or over-medicating elderly relatives to gain control of their finances. It happened more often than people wanted to believe. Could Victoria be doing something similar to Marcus? I needed to talk to my son, really talk to him, away from this house and Victoria's influence. But I also needed more information. I needed to understand what was happening with Victoria's business, where all her money was going, and what she was planning. The dry cleaning. Victoria had asked me to pick up her dry cleaning. I grabbed the ticket from the counter and looked at the address. Riverside Luxury Cleaners on Main Street, an upscale place that probably charged $40 to clean a blouse. But more importantly, it was right next to Pemberton Financial Advisory Services, the firm whose name I'd seen on an envelope in the mail, and whose logo had been on some of the documents in Victoria's filing cabinet. Maybe it was time for me to take an interest in financial planning for my own future. I picked up Victoria's dry cleaning, spending a few minutes chatting with the woman at the counter about the beautiful fall weather and how long I'd been in the area. Then I walked next door to Pemberton Financial Advisory Services. The office was elegant but not ostentatious, warm wood furniture, professional but welcoming. A receptionist looked up from her computer with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't. But I was hoping someone might have a few minutes to discuss financial planning services. I'm Eleanor Whitfield, and I'm looking for someone to help me manage my retirement accounts." It was a calculated risk. If Victoria had connections here, dropping my name might get back to her. But I was betting that in a firm this size, the receptionist wouldn't know every client's family connections. "Let me check. Please have a seat." I sat in one of the leather chairs and picked up a brochure about the firm's services. That's when I saw it, a framed photo on the wall showing the firm's partners. 3 people, one of whom was clearly Clarissa Pemberton, the woman who'd been at Victoria's dinner party. So this was a family business. Clarissa Pemberton had connections to a financial advisory firm, and Victoria wanted to land her as a client. That tracked with what Victoria had told me this morning. But it also meant that if Victoria had Clarissa's personal financial records, she might have stolen them from this very firm. "Mrs. Whitfield?" A young man in his 30s approached, extending his hand. "I'm Jason Chen, Junior Advisor. I have about 15 minutes if you'd like to discuss our services." "That would be wonderful, thank you." He led me to a small conference room and pulled out a portfolio of materials. "So what brings you to Pemberton Financial today?" I'd prepared my story on the drive over. I'm 70 years old, recently widowed, and I've been living with my son and his wife. But I'm thinking it might be time to establish my own place again, and I want to make sure my finances are in order. I have some savings and Social Security, but I'm not sure if I have enough to live independently. I'm sorry for your loss, he said with what seemed like genuine sympathy. And it's wise to plan ahead. Can you tell me approximately what assets you're working with? I gave him realistic numbers, my actual savings, my Social Security income, the potential equity from my house on Maple Grove Avenue. We talked for a few minutes about various investment options. Then I said, as casually as I could manage, actually, my daughter-in-law mentioned she knows someone at this firm. Clarissa Pemberton? She's been helping my daughter-in-law with some business planning. Jason's expression flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. Surprise, maybe? Or concern? Ms. Pemberton is one of our founding partners, he said carefully. Though I should mention that we don't typically discuss other clients. Privacy policies, you understand. Of course, of course. I just thought it was a nice coincidence. My daughter-in-law, Victoria Morrison, speaks very highly of her. Another flicker of reaction. This time I was certain, he recognized Victoria's name, and something about it made him uncomfortable. I see, was all he said. Well, Mrs. Whitfield, based on what you've told me, I think you have several good options for maintaining financial independence. He continued with the consultation, professional and helpful. But I could tell something had shifted when I mentioned Victoria's name. As he was walking me back to the reception area, I took another calculated risk. Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind me asking, but when I mentioned my daughter-in-law's name, you seemed, I don't know, surprised? Is there something I should know? I'm living in her home, and if there are financial issues. He stopped walking and looked at me carefully, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he lowered his voice. Mrs. Whitfield, I really can't discuss other clients or potential clients. But I will say this, if you're concerned about your living situation or your family's financial stability, it might be wise to consult with your own attorney. Someone who represents your interests specifically. The words were carefully chosen, professional, giving nothing away directly. But the meaning was clear, there was something wrong with Victoria's situation, something that had raised red flags at this financial firm. Thank you, I said quietly. I appreciate your time and your discretion. He nodded and handed me his business card. Please feel free to call if you'd like to set up a full consultation. And Mrs. Whitfield? Take care of yourself. I left the office with more questions than answers, but with confirmation of my instincts. Victoria was involved in something questionable, and people in the financial industry had noticed. By the time I got back to the house, it was almost 3 p.m. Victoria would be home soon. I hung her dry cleaning in the closet, noting that she'd had 6 items cleaned, at approximately $40 each. That was $240 for 1 week's worth of clothing maintenance. Just one small example of her expensive lifestyle. A lifestyle that was being funded by, what? A depleted trust fund? A mysterious LLC? Stolen client information? Life insurance policies on my son? I was starting to piece together a picture, but I needed more information. And I needed to talk to Marcus tonight when Victoria went to her yoga class. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing normal household tasks, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking about those life insurance policies. $7 million payable to Victoria if Marcus died. And Marcus, medicated into compliance and depression. And Victoria, researching dementia and involuntary commitment. What if Victoria was planning to have Marcus declared incompetent? With power of attorney and healthcare directives, she could control his medical treatment, his finances, his entire life. She could have him committed to a facility, access all his money, and no one would question it because she was his legal wife with all the proper paperwork. Or worse, what if she was planning something more permanent? Those life insurance policies suggested that Marcus was worth more to her dead than alive. The thought made me feel physically ill. This was my son. My child. And he was trapped in a situation that might be far more dangerous than just an unhappy marriage. Victoria arrived home at 3:15, breezing through the door with shopping bags from an expensive boutique. "Eleanor, did you get my dry cleaning?" "Yes, it's in your closet." "Perfect. Oh, and I need you to do something for me tomorrow. I have a photo shoot here at the house. A lifestyle magazine is doing a feature on my home and business. I need you to stay in your room from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The photographer doesn't need anyone else in the shots. Stay in your room for 8 hours like a child being punished." A week ago, I would have agreed meekly. Today, I just nodded and said, "I actually have some errands to run tomorrow. I'll be out most of the day anyway." She looked surprised but pleased. "That works even better." "What errands?" "Just some personal appointments. Nothing exciting." I smiled blandly and went back to chopping vegetables for dinner. I could feel her studying me, trying to determine if there was defiance in my tone. But I'd kept my voice neutral, my expression pleasant. There was nothing for her to object to. "Okay then," she said finally. "I'm going to go work on some client proposals. Marcus should be home around 7. He has therapy tonight at 8:30, so dinner needs to be ready early." Therapy. Marcus was in therapy. Another thing I hadn't known. "I'll have dinner ready by 6:30, I said. She nodded and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing dread. Marcus had therapy every week, was medicated on multiple prescriptions, had signed away his legal autonomy, and was worth $7 million dead. And I'd been so busy being a victim of Victoria's cruelty that I'd almost missed the signs that my son might be in real danger. That ended now. Tonight, when Victoria left for her yoga class, would talk to Marcus. Really talk to him, the way I should have months ago. And then I would figure out exactly what Victoria was planning and how to stop her. Because I hadn't survived 70 years, raised 3 children, and endured all the hardships of my life just to stand by and watch while a manipulative sociopath destroyed my son. Victoria might have thought she was dealing with a helpless old hag she could intimidate and control. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. Marcus arrived home at 6:45, looking even more exhausted than he had that morning. His tie was loosened, his usually neat hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't have hidden. "Smells good, Mom," he said quietly, setting his briefcase by the door. "What are we having?" "Chicken piccata, roasted vegetables, and that wild rice you like." I'd made his favorite meal deliberately, hoping it might help him relax enough to talk to me later. Victoria appeared moments later, changed from her business clothes into her yoga outfit, expensive leggings and a matching top that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked at the food I'd plated with critical eyes. "Marcus, don't eat too much. You have therapy in an hour and Dr. Reeves said heavy meals before sessions can make you sluggish." Marcus nodded obediently and took a small portion, though I could see the hunger in his eyes. When had my son started rationing his food in his own home? We ate in near silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware and the occasional comment from Victoria about her upcoming yoga class. She was meeting someone named Sienna there, an absolute darling who runs a wellness influencer network that could be perfect for my brand expansion. Everything was always about her brand, her business, her image. At 7:50, Victoria grabbed her designer yoga bag and headed for the door. "I'll be back by 9:30. Marcus, make sure you take your evening medications before you leave for therapy. Eleanor, please have the kitchen cleaned and the dishwasher running by the time I get home." Orders delivered, she left without waiting for responses. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, Marcus's shoulders sagged like puppet strings had been cut. He pushed his half-eaten dinner away and put his head in his hands. "Marcus," I said gently, moving to sit beside him. "We need to talk. Really talk. No more excuses about being tired or having somewhere to be." "Mom, he stopped, his voice breaking. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth. What's happening to you? What has she done?" He looked up at me, and I saw tears streaming down his face. My strong, capable son was crying like a frightened child. I'm trapped, he whispered. I'm completely trapped and I don't know how to get out. I took his hands in mine. They were trembling. Tell me everything. From the beginning. And he did. The story that emerged over the next 30 minutes was even worse than I'd imagined. It had started 3 years ago, shortly after he'd married Victoria. She'd been charming during their courtship, ambitious but not cruel, successful but not obsessive. He'd thought he'd found a perfect partner. The change had been gradual. First, she'd convinced him to combine their finances completely, joint accounts, shared credit cards, pooled investments. We're a team, she'd said. We should trust each other completely. Then she'd started managing all their household finances. You work so hard, darling. Let me handle the boring money stuff. He'd been grateful at first. Less stress, more time for his demanding job. But then she'd started making larger decisions without consulting him. Buying expensive furniture. Taking lavish trips. Running up credit card bills. When he'd questioned the spending, she'd become defensive, then angry. She made me feel like I was being controlling, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Like I was trying to limit her success, keep her small. She'd cry and say I didn't believe in her dreams, that I was just like her father who never supported her mother's ambitions. So he'd backed off, guilty and confused. The spending continued. Then came the medications. It started when Marcus went to see a doctor about work stress and trouble sleeping. Victoria had insisted on coming to the appointment with him. She told the doctor I was having panic attacks, that I was depressed, that she was worried about me. And I was stressed, work was brutal, and our finances were becoming a nightmare. So when the doctor prescribed Xanax and antidepressants, I took them. But Victoria had started controlling his medication. She'd pick up the prescriptions, set out his daily pills, remind him constantly to take them. You need to be consistent with these, Marcus. Dr. Reeves said so. Except Dr. Reeves had prescribed 1 Xanax twice daily as needed. Victoria was giving him 3 pills a day, every day, along with increasing doses of other medications. I started feeling foggy all the time, Marcus said. Confused. Tired. I couldn't think clearly. I'd forget conversations, miss meetings at work. My performance started slipping, and that made my anxiety worse, so Victoria would increase my medication to help. The therapy had been Victoria's idea too. She'd found Dr. Reeves, made the appointments, and even attended some sessions with Marcus to provide support. But the therapy isn't helping because Dr. Reeves only hears Victoria's version of everything. She tells him I'm deteriorating, becoming incompetent, possibly showing early signs of dementia. And because I'm so medicated that I can barely form coherent thoughts half the time, I can't defend myself effectively. My worst fears were being confirmed. Victoria was systematically drugging my son, destroying his mental health, and building a case for his incompetence. The life insurance policies, I said. The power of attorney documents. Did you know about those? He nodded miserably. She told me it was standard financial planning. That all married couples should have life insurance and legal documents in place. I was so foggy from the medications that I just signed whatever she put in front of me. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Mom, I think she's trying to either have me declared incompetent or worse. Or worse. I've heard her on the phone sometimes, talking to someone about accelerating the timeline and maximizing the payout. I'm not stupid, even drugged. Those life insurance policies are worth $7 million. I'm worth more to her dead than alive. The words hung in the air between us, terrible and undeniable. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my heart breaking. Why didn't you ask for help? I tried. His voice rose with anguish. 3 months ago, I tried to talk to Sophie. I called her and started to explain, and Victoria came home early. She heard me on the phone. After that, she took my phone and changed all my passwords for security purposes. She monitors my calls now, my emails, everything. I'm completely isolated. And that morning when you apologized to me? You wanted to talk. Yes. But she tracks my phone's location. If I'm somewhere she doesn't expect, she calls immediately. She'd know if we met somewhere. She'd know if I went to a lawyer or the police. He was crying harder now. I can't even trust my own mind anymore. The medications make me paranoid. Sometimes I wonder if I'm imagining everything, if it's all in my head like she says. It's not in your head, I said firmly. Marcus, I found documents in her office. Financial records, property deeds, research about involuntary commitment. This is real. She's planning something terrible. He looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. What do we do? How do we stop her? I'd been thinking about this all afternoon, ever since I discovered the evidence. We needed to move carefully, strategically. Victoria was smart and she'd covered her tracks well. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the old hag she'd threatened to throw out on the street. First, I said, we need to get you off those medications. Cold turkey could be dangerous, but we need to start reducing your dosage immediately so you can think clearly. She controls the pill bottles. She sets out my doses every day. Then we'll deceive her. Take the pills she gives you, but don't swallow them. Hide them, flush them, whatever you need to do. Start thinking clearly again. He nodded, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. Second, we need to document everything. I've already photographed the documents in her office, but we need more. Her bank statements, her phone records, evidence of the overmedication. Can you access any of that? She uses my laptop sometimes when hers is charging. I might be able to check her email if she's left it logged in. Good. And third, we need allies. Your sister Sophie, your brother Brian if we can reach him. My friend Dorothy from the hospital, her daughter is a family law attorney. We build a case, gather evidence, and then we move all at once before Victoria realizes what's happening. She'll fight back, Marcus said, fear creeping back into his voice. You don't know what she's capable of, Mom. When she's cornered, she's vicious. I know exactly what she's capable of. She called me an old hag and threatened to put me on the street. I squeezed his hands. But she doesn't know what I'm capable of. And neither do you, apparently. For the first time in months, I saw my son smile. We spent the next 20 minutes making a plan. Marcus would start reducing his medication immediately. He'd pretend to be as foggy and compliant as ever while actually beginning to clear his head. He'd look for opportunities to access Victoria's digital records. And he'd start documenting every conversation, every medication dose she pushed on him, every controlling behavior. I would continue my investigation, gathering evidence and reaching out to potential allies. And we'd both be careful, so careful, because Victoria couldn't know we were onto her until we were ready to act. You need to leave for therapy, I said, checking the time. It was 8:20. Go, act normal, don't give her any reason to suspect anything has changed. He stood, then pulled me into a tight hug. Thank you, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. For letting her treat you that way, for not standing up to her, for... Stop. We'll fix this together. Now go. He left, and I immediately started working. I called Sophie first, using my cell phone rather than the house phone. Mom? Is everything okay? Sophie sounded worried. I rarely called her in the evening. Sophie, I need you to listen carefully. Don't react, don't panic, just listen. I told her everything, Marcus's situation, Victoria's plans, the evidence I'd found. To her credit, Sophie stayed calm and focused. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, she said immediately. I'll tell my boss it's a family emergency. What do you need me to do? Bring your laptop and be prepared to help document everything. We need to build an airtight case. And Sophie? Don't tell anyone you're coming. If Victoria finds out, she might accelerate whatever she's planning. Understood. Mom? Thank you for not giving up on him. He's my son. I'd fight armies for any of my children. Next, I called Dorothy, my friend from 40 years of nursing together. She'd retired 5 years ago, but we still talked weekly. Eleanor. What a nice surprise. How are things with Marcus and his wife? Dorothy, I need your help. And I need your daughter's legal expertise. I gave her the abbreviated version, enough to convey the urgency without overwhelming her with details. Oh my God. Eleanor, this is serious. This is financial exploitation, elder abuse. Well, not elder since Marcus isn't elderly, but spousal abuse certainly. Maybe even attempted murder if she's really planning what you think. Dorothy's voice had shifted into the brisk, efficient tone I remembered from our nursing days. Let me call Veronica right now. She practices family law and has handled cases like this. Can you meet with her tomorrow? Yes. Anytime, anywhere. I'll have her call you within the hour to set it up. And Eleanor? Be careful. If this woman is as dangerous as you think, you need to watch your back. Victoria returned from yoga at 9:35, glowing with post-exercise endorphins and chattering about the wonderful conversation she'd had with Sienna about brand partnerships. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the already clean counters, playing my role of compliant servant. How was your evening? She asked, in the tone people use when they don't actually care about the answer. Quiet. I just cleaned up and did some reading. Good. I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early. Big photo shoot tomorrow, remember? She started toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Eleanor? I've been thinking. This arrangement, you living here, it's not sustainable long-term. Once Marcus is more stable, we should revisit the conversation about senior living options. There it was. The confirmation that Marcus was right, she was building toward having him declared incompetent, and once that happened, she'd remove me from the house so there were no witnesses to what came next. Of course, I said mildly. Whatever you think is best. She looked satisfied and headed upstairs. I heard the bath start running, heard her moving around in the master bedroom. Then silence. I worked late into the night, organizing all the photos I'd taken of documents, creating a timeline of events, making notes of everything Marcus had told me. Veronica, Dorothy's daughter, called at 10:30. Mrs. Whitfield? My mom filled me in on the situation. This is extremely serious. I need you to understand that what you're describing could be financial exploitation, potential fraud, and possibly conspiracy to commit harm. We need to move very carefully. What do we need to prove the case? Everything you've documented is a good start, but it's not enough yet. We need to establish a clear pattern of behavior, show that Victoria has been systematically controlling Marcus's finances and medical care, and prove that she has ulterior motives. The life insurance policies are damning, but a good defense attorney will argue their normal financial planning. So what do? We build an overwhelming case. Financial records showing she's depleted accounts or stolen money. Medical evidence showing Marcus is being overmedicated. Testimony from Marcus himself about the abuse and control. And ideally, we catch her doing something clearly illegal, accessing accounts she shouldn't, forging documents, something undeniable. How long will that take? If we move fast and get lucky? A week, maybe 2. But Mrs. Whitfield, you need to be prepared for the possibility that we might not get everything we need in time. If Marcus is in immediate danger, we might have to move before the case is perfect. We talked for another 20 minutes, formulating a strategy. Veronica would start filing preliminary paperwork, getting ready to move legally the moment we had enough evidence. Sophie would arrive tomorrow and help with documentation. And I would continue gathering evidence while keeping Victoria convinced everything was normal. Over the next week, our plan unfolded with careful precision. Marcus started reducing his medication, flushing half the pills Victoria gave him down the toilet. Within 3 days, the fog in his eyes began to clear. He started accidentally leaving his laptop open when Victoria used it, and we discovered her email correspondence with someone named Richard Chin, discussing strategies for having Marcus declared incompetent and accessing his financial assets. Richard Chen, I realized with a chill, shared a last name with Jason Chen from Pemberton Financial Advisory. Were they related? Was Victoria working with someone inside the firm to steal client information? Sophie arrived on Wednesday, telling Victoria she was in town for a business conference. Victoria was annoyed by the unexpected visit but couldn't refuse to let Sophie see her own brother. Sophie brought hidden recording equipment and helped document several conversations where Victoria discussed Marcus's deteriorating condition with Dr. Reeves. We also discovered that Victoria had been slowly transferring money from Marcus's investment accounts into her LLC accounts, small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. Over the past year, she'd moved over $400,000 of Marcus's money into accounts he didn't know existed. But the smoking gun came on Friday afternoon. I'd been monitoring Victoria's schedule carefully, and I knew she had a meeting with Clarissa Pemberton at 2 p.m. to pitch her services for the Wellness Retreat project. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Clarissa. It had been a risk, but I'd called her directly, identified myself as Marcus's mother, and asked for a private meeting. To my surprise, she'd agreed immediately. I'd been concerned about Victoria, Clarissa had said when we met at a coffee shop in Hartford, far from Riverside where we might be seen. She's approached me several times about business partnerships, but there's something off about her. She seems to know things about my finances that she shouldn't know, specific investment amounts, account numbers. It's made me very uncomfortable. She has your financial records, I'd told her. Personal bank statements, tax returns. I found them in her locked filing cabinet. Clarissa's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Those records are confidential. The only place they exist is at Pemberton Financial Advisory, the firm my family owns. How would she have access? I think she might have an inside source. Someone named Richard Chen. Do you know him? Richard. Clarissa's expression had shifted from shock to anger. Richard is my cousin. He's a junior partner at the firm. Oh my God. Is he giving her confidential client information? That's what I need your help proving. And so we'd set a trap. Clarissa had agreed to meet with Victoria and pretend to be interested in hiring her, while secretly recording the conversation. If Victoria revealed information about Clarissa's finances that she shouldn't know, if she let slip any details about her illegal access to confidential records, we'd have her on tape. The meeting was happening right now, in Victoria's home office, while I pretended to be out running errands. But I wasn't out, I was in my room, listening through the baby monitor Sophie had hidden in Victoria's office that morning. Clarissa's voice came through clearly. So Victoria, tell me why I should hire you for this project. What makes your approach unique? Well, Clarissa, I believe in a fully integrated approach to brand management. I take the time to really understand my clients' complete financial picture, their assets, their investment strategies, their long-term goals. For instance, I know you have substantial holdings in the tech sector, approximately $2.3 million in various stocks and mutual funds. I can help you leverage that financial stability to build a brand that reflects your success. There it was. Victoria had just revealed specific knowledge of Clarissa's investments, information that wasn't public, that could only have come from confidential financial records. Clarissa pressed further. How do you know about my tech sector investments? I don't recall sharing that information with you. A pause. Then Victoria's voice, slightly nervous. Oh, well, you mentioned it at the dinner party, remember? You were discussing investment strategies with the other guests. No, Victoria, I wasn't. I never discuss my specific investments publicly. So I'll ask again, how do you know details about my personal financial portfolio? A longer pause. Then Victoria's voice, colder now. I think this meeting is over, Clarissa. If you're going to accuse me of something, just say it directly. I'm saying that you have access to my confidential financial records, and I want to know how you got them and what you're planning to do with them. That's absurd. I would never. Victoria, I own the financial advisory firm where those records are kept. I know exactly how confidential they're supposed to be. I also know that my cousin Richard has been accessing my files without authorization. So let me be very clear, if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm going to the police and the State Financial Regulatory Board. They take theft of financial information very seriously. The silence that followed was deafening. Then I heard something I never expected. Victoria started crying. Please, Clarissa, you have to understand. I needed the information to compete. Everyone in this industry has advantages, family money, connections, insider knowledge. I was just trying to level the playing field. Richard was helping me understand the local market, that's all. By stealing confidential client information and using it to manipulate business relationships? I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to be successful. To build something real. My business, my brand, it's all I have. What about your husband, Victoria? What about Marcus? Another pause. Then Victoria's voice, harder now. Marcus is a means to an end. He was useful for a while, good income, stable job, gave me credibility as a married woman in a conservative market. But he's become a liability. Too stressed, too unstable. I'm managing the situation. Managing the situation? What does that mean? It means I have a plan for my future, and it doesn't include being dragged down by a husband who can't handle pressure. Now, if you'll excuse me, this conversation is over. I heard movement, then Clarissa's voice, firm and clear. Victoria, I'm giving you one chance to make this right. You return any confidential information you've stolen, you end your relationship with Richard, and you get professional help. Do that, and I won't press charges. But if you refuse, I'm going to the authorities today. You have until 5 p.m. to decide. The door slammed. I heard Victoria's footsteps pacing in her office, then the sound of her on the phone. Richard, we have a problem. Clarissa knows. I don't care how she found out. No, I'm not taking the fall for this alone. If I go down, you go down with me. The plan with Marcus needs to happen sooner. We can't wait. I don't care about your concerns. Make it happen this week or I'm telling everyone that stealing client data was your idea. She hung up. I heard her make another call. Dr. Reeves, it's Victoria Morrison. I need to talk to you about my husband's condition. Yes, I think it's time we discuss more intensive treatment options. I'm concerned he's becoming a danger to himself. An involuntary psychiatric hold? Yes, I think that might be necessary. How soon can we arrange it? My blood ran cold. She was planning to have Marcus involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility, using his overmedication and her fabricated concerns as justification. Once he was committed, she'd have complete control over his treatment, his finances, everything. And in a psychiatric facility, heavily medicated and isolated, Marcus could deteriorate very quickly. The kind of deterioration that might lead to a tragic accident or medical emergency. The kind of deterioration that would trigger a $7 million life insurance payout. I didn't wait to hear more. I grabbed my phone and called Veronica immediately. She's planning to have him committed. This week. We need to move now. I'll file the emergency paperwork immediately. Get Marcus out of that house today. Right now. Take him somewhere safe where Victoria can't find him. I called Marcus next. Come home immediately. Emergency. Don't tell Victoria, just say you're sick and need to leave work. Then I called Sophie. It's happening. We need to move now. Within 2 hours, everything was in motion. Veronica filed emergency protective orders based on the evidence we'd gathered. Sophie arrived at the house with a police officer, a friend from her hospital who understood the urgency of the situation. Marcus came home, and under police supervision, we helped him pack essential belongings. Victoria arrived home at 4:30 to find a police officer in her living room, Marcus packing his clothes, and Sophie documenting everything with her phone. What is going on? Victoria's voice was shrill with panic. Officer, these people are in my home without permission. Mrs. Morrison, I'm here at the request of Marcus Morrison, who owns this home jointly with you. He's removing his personal belongings. No crime is being committed. Marcus, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Victoria turned to him, her face contorted with confusion and rage. Marcus looked at her with clear eyes, the first time he'd looked truly clear in months. I know everything, Victoria. The overmedication, the stolen client information, the life insurance policies, the plan to have me committed. It's over. You're not well, Marcus. You're confused. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that shows you need help. I recorded your conversation with Clarissa this afternoon, I interrupted, stepping forward. And your phone call with Richard Chen. And your call to Dr. Reeves about having Marcus committed. We have everything, Victoria. Every document, every transaction, every lie. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally, cold rage. The mask she'd worn for so long completely dropped away, and I saw the real Victoria for the first time. There was nothing there. No empathy, no remorse, just fury at being caught. You, she hissed at me. You stupid old hag. You've ruined everything. I had it all planned perfectly, and you. I stopped you from murdering my son, I said calmly. And now you're going to face the consequences. The police officer stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to calm down. But Victoria wasn't done. She lunged at me, and for a moment I thought she might actually attack. But the officer moved between us, and Sophie grabbed my arm, pulling me back. You're nothing. Victoria screamed at me. A useless old woman who should have been in a nursing home months ago. You've destroyed my business, my reputation, my life, all because you couldn't mind your own business. Your business was built on fraud, I replied. Your reputation was built on lies. And your life was built on destroying my son. I don't regret stopping you for a second. Over the next few hours, more police arrived. Veronica showed up with the emergency protective order, which prohibited Victoria from contacting Marcus or entering any property he owned. Financial investigators came to examine Victoria's records. And agents from the State Regulatory Board arrived to investigate the theft of confidential client information. Richard Chen was arrested at his office that evening. Clarissa's testimony, combined with the recordings and the documents I'd found, provided overwhelming evidence of financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Victoria was arrested 3 days later. The charges were extensive: financial exploitation, theft, fraud, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted false imprisonment. The DA's office was also investigating whether her overmedication of Marcus constituted attempted murder, though proving intent would be difficult. But the evidence was damning. We had everything: the financial records showing she'd stolen over $400,000 from Marcus, the client records she'd obtained illegally, the recordings of her planning to have him committed, the excessive life insurance policies, the forged signatures, all of it. Marcus moved in with Sophie temporarily while he recovered from months of overmedication and psychological abuse. Dr. Reeves lost his license for failing to recognize clear signs of medication abuse and for accepting Victoria's version of events without proper investigation. The story made local news, then regional news. Victoria's Instagram following collapsed overnight as the truth about her elevated lifestyle came out, funded by theft, fraud, and exploitation. As for me, I moved back to my house on Maple Grove Avenue. Marcus and Sophie helped me renovate it, adding first-floor accessibility features so I'd never need to worry about the stairs again. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, I sat in the courthouse for her sentencing. She'd taken a plea deal rather than face trial, 15 years in prison for financial crimes, with the possibility of additional charges if the attempted murder investigation yielded more evidence. She looked diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of the makeup that had always been her armor. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and looked directly at me. I underestimated you, she said simply. That was my mistake. Yes, I replied. It was. The judge sentenced her to the maximum term under the plea agreement. As they led her away, Victoria looked back one more time. I met her eyes without flinching. I was Eleanor Whitfield. 70 years old. Mother of 3. Former nurse. Survivor of poverty, loss, and hardship. And I was the woman who had saved her son from a monster who wore a pretty face. Victoria had called me an old hag and threatened to throw me out on the street. She'd been right about one thing. I did remember that night. I remembered it every time I looked at my son, healthy and clear-eyed again, rebuilding his life with Sophie's help. I remembered it every time I walked through my own home, independent and free. I remembered it every time someone asked me how I'd managed to uncover such an elaborate scheme. I just paid attention, I'd tell them. And I refused to be dismissed. A year later, Marcus threw a dinner party at his new townhouse, his own place, bought with what remained of his savings after Victoria's theft. Sophie was there with her family, visiting from Portland. Brian had come home from overseas deployment. And I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by my children and grandchildren. To Mom, Marcus said, raising his glass. The toughest woman I know. Thank you for not giving up on me. To Grandma Eleanor, my grandchildren chorused. The detective. I smiled, feeling more content than I had in years. My hips still ache sometimes, especially when it rained. I was still 70 years old, still aging, still facing all the challenges that came with growing older. But I was no longer anyone's victim. I was no longer the woman who made herself small to avoid conflict. I was Eleanor Whitfield, and I'd learned that being underestimated could be the greatest weapon of all. Victoria had taught me that lesson, even if she hadn't meant to. And I'd never forget it. If you've followed my story from the beginning, thank you. I hope it reminds you that age doesn't mean powerlessness, and that family is worth fighting for, even when that fight requires courage you didn't know you had. Comment below which country you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever had to stand up against someone who underestimated you? How did it feel? And remember, if something feels wrong in your family or a loved one's situation, trust your instincts. Pay attention. Ask questions. Don't be dismissed. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person who can change everything. Thank you for being here until the end. Your support means everything. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone make you feel small. Eleanor.